Have you ever felt on the verge of withdrawal? When does everything you have done so far was in vain? Charles Dickens went through it too, but he discovered advice that saved him and can save you too. What you are about to hear is not just literature, it is survival. Dickens wrote a powerful truth that can change your trajectory. Stay to the end, because this lesson may be what prevents you from falling. If you are at this time of fighting, write, "I won't give up" in the comments and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving forces where many only see. Before becoming the most read writer of the 19th century, before the crowded theaters, enthusiastic criticism and the eternal name in history books, Charles Dickens was just a young unknown with a heavy past and an uncertain future. Few know, but there was a day when he seriously thought of giving up. A day when the weight of rejection was greater than the desire to continue. A day when the pain spoke louder than hope. He had already been humiliated, ignored, discredited. He knew what it was like to work long hours in unhealthy factories. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of his father's bankruptcy, the shame of family arrest, social abandonment. And even after so much effort to build a career, the doors seemed to remain closed. Rejected manuscripts, ignored ideas, acid criticism. And the question that many have been asked, is it worth continuing? He began to echo in his mind. It was on this day, in the face of the silence of the world and the inner noise of its insecurities, that Dickens found himself on the verge of withdrawal. But then something inside him, small, almost imperceptible, whispered, "Continue." And it was this whisper that changed everything. It was not a voice from outside. It was something deeper, a breath of faith that resisted even in the face of failure, a purposeful flash that survived discouragement. He did not know if one day would be read, understood, or recognized, but I knew I needed to continue, and that was the advice that saved him. The truth is that the greatest moments of turn are not born of applause, but from persistence in days of silence. And Dickens discovered this in practice. He chose to continue, even when everything said to stop. He chose to believe when there was no evidence. And it was this decision that put the work of a lifetime in motion. You may be living a moment like that. Maybe no one will see your fight. Maybe the doors are closing. Perhaps the effort is not generating the return you expected. And maybe, like Dickens, you are on the verge of releasing everything. But there is something you need to listen to now. Continue. Not because it's easy, not because you have guarantees, but because there is something bigger forming behind the scenes of your pain. Dickens did not know that. When deciding to continue on that dark day, he was paving the way to be one of the most influential voices in history. He just knew that stopping meant to betray. And moving on, even staggering, was the only chance of a new tomorrow. You don't have to have all the answers today. Just need to take another step. Victory does not always scream. Sometimes she whispers. And that whisper Dickens heard, maybe it's being repeated to you now. Continue. Because it may be precisely this step, this lonely and silent effort, that will change everything. The advice did not come from books or masters. It came from a silent, dark, invisible place, the bottom of the well. It was there where everything seemed lost, that Dickens heard what would accompany him for a lifetime. A simple but transformative phrase, never give up in the middle of the tunnel, because that's where light begins to appear. He didn't read this somewhere, he felt. He saw this truth grow inside him like a spark that resists darkness. And from that moment, whenever everything seemed to crumble, he remembered, the light does not shine at the beginning. It appears when everything seems darker. This advice became anchor. It became a shelter. It turned direction. Because, like so many others who have undergone silent trauma, Dickens has learned that pain can make us discredit everything. And the most dangerous is not the suffering itself, but what he whispers. Stop. It won't work. No one calls. It makes no difference. That's when we give up. Not because we are weak, but because we forget that light takes, but it arrives. Always enough. Dickens chose to remember. Whenever criticism weighed, whenever loneliness visited him, whenever the memories of childhood invaded the dawn, he wrote, even without inspiration, even without knowing if anyone would read, because writing for him was a way of keeping the light on. It was to tell yourself, it's not over yet. The pen was its resistance, the paper your trench. And in that little gesture to keep writing, even without applause, hope was back. The light came back. This advice that was born in the darkness accompanied him until the end of his life. He doesn't He was a man immune to tiredness, had crises, it had fears, but he always remembered, the tunnel deceives. He makes it seem that the night has no end, but it is fair there, when everything darkens, that the first ray begins to be born. And when you stop in the middle, loses a chance to see. How many people are today in the middle of the tunnel? How many, like Dickens, are injured inside, thinking of giving up, not knowing that they are a few steps from the turn? This advice was not just for him, it was for all of us. For those who cry alone, to those who doubt in silence, for those who are doing everything right and still do not see the result. Believe me, if you stop now, you will never know what was about to happen. Dickens almost stopped, but it didn't stop. And because of this, the world met characters, stories, and truths that changed generations, all because, in the middle of the tunnel, he decided to believe that the light would still come. And she came. How will it come to you if you continue? Charles Dickens not only survived the pain, he transcribed it, and he did so masterfully, spreading his resistance to each character he created. Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Nicholas Nickleby. All of them at first glance may seem simple protagonists of Victorian novels, but in fact, they are much more than that. They are echoes of Dickens's own soul. They are fragmented portraits of the choice he himself made so many times. Continuing, Oliver the orphan who dares to ask for more, despite the misery and rejection. David, the boy who grows in the midst of humiliation, but does not abandon the desire to be a worthy. Nicholas, a young man marked by injustice and exploited by cruel adults, but remains firm, guided by compassion and sense of justice. None of these characters is a classic hero. They all bleed, they all fail. Everyone suffers, falls, are betrayed, but everyone has something in common. They continue. This continuity is not empty force. It is not blind stubbornness. It is faith in the midst of chaos. It is firm conviction, silent but unshakable, that pain cannot be the final chapter. And that's where Dickens's genius reveals itself. He did not create unattainable, perfect, or idealized figures, created survivors, created broken people who go walking. And in doing so, he reached for the reader and said, "See, it's possible. You can also go through it and win." Each character was in the background a ciphered message, a subtle reminder, you're not alone. Each time Oliver resists the cruelty of the adult world, Dickens is whispering, I also resist. When David finds strength in his own dignity, even being rejected, he is Dickens saying, hope is not out there, it is inside. And when Nicholas faces the system while being good, it is Dickens reaffirming that it is possible to be righteous even in a rotten world. He didn't shout these messages, he let the characters speak for him. And so your literature thrills us so much to this day, because she not only tells us stories, she inspires us, she mirrors us. It comforts us without saving us from the truth. These characters did not win because they were spared. They won because they persisted. And that's the secret that Dickens wanted to give us. It's not the absence of suffering that defines us, but what we do with it. The choice to continue, even without guarantees. To follow, even with fear. To try again, even after the fall. Each character was a piece of him, and now each of them is also a piece of ours. Because when reading Dickens, not only do we see your story, we see our own writing with more courage. How many times have you thought everything was over, that this moment of pain was definitive, that this fall marked the end point? Charles Dickens knew this feeling well. He lived days when everything seemed to crawl, the childhood torn, the wounded dignity, the silently abandoned dreams. But it was precisely these days, in those who seemed darker, that he learned a truth that he would carry for a lifetime. Defeat sometimes disguises herself to end, but it's just a fresh start. It was inside the factory, gluing labels in dirty grease jars, which Dickens began to realize. That hurt. It was humiliating. It was the opposite of what any boy should live. And for some time, it seemed the end of the line. But unknowingly, he was being pushed to the beginning of a mission. Each work shift, every contained tear, every sleepless night was writing the introduction of something bigger. The pain he thought would destroy him, shaped him, and he never confused pain with destination again. This is one of the deepest lessons of your trajectory. Dickens understood early that there are times when life seems to break us, not because he wants to destroy us, but because he is making room for something new. The problem is that the process of transformation seems too much with that of defeat. When we lose something important, when we are left behind, when we are rejected, discredit forgotten. At these times, everything in us shouts, "It's over." But that's where hope, cultivated with patience, begins to be born. Dickens decided he would not accept pain as a sentence. I was going to hear her as called, sadness as a push, and what seemed the end. The arrest of the father, child labor, social humiliation became the beginning of everything. Without these experiences, he would not have created Oliver Twist. Neither David Copperfield, not even the orphans, the dreamers, the broken that inhabit their pages. He saw that there is hidden power at times when everything seems lost, that the human soul, when put to the test, can reveal forces that were dormant. And so he made a rare choice, not denying the pain but diving of it until he found meaning. Today, many live silent defeats, unexpected ending, diagnostics that scare, farewells that hurt, and they think, it's over. But perhaps, like Dickens, they are facing a turn, of a birth hidden under the cloak of loss, of a new cycle that begins with the appearance of collapse. Because not every fall is fall. Sometimes it's solo, where something new will grow. And Dickens, who survived his own darkness, became a living proof that pain may be the prelude of a mission, that what looks like an end can be just a comma, and that the story is not over yet, as long as there is those who decide to continue writing. Charles Dickens openly never wrote an emotional survival manual. He never proposed to teach overcoming formulas. But in each line that came out of his pen, there was a silent, firm, unbreakable, directed message to a specific type of person: the defeated, those who were already on the floor, those who saw no way out, those who had lost almost everything, but the breath of dignity left within them. In his texts, there is a phrase not written but always present: there is nothing as useless as despair. This is not an official quote. It is not recorded in a specific book, but it is recorded in the invisible fabric of all his work. Because for Dickens, giving up was a luxury that the wounded could not take place. He knew from experience that when everything seems lost, something still remains, and that something is choice, the choice of not surrendering. This is why your characters rarely win easily. They do not triumph by luck, do not escape unharmed. They fall, cry, are humiliated, starve, are betrayed, but they don't stop. And this silent persistence, this continuing despite, is the true message Dickens left to the world. In Oliver Twist, a boy faces misery and violence without losing his innocence. In David Copperfield, the protagonist struggles to maintain his integrity in a world that insists on deforming him. In all its orphans, workers, miserable and forgotten, there is this trait: the refusal to deliver the soul to despair. Dickens did not idealize suffering. He knew that the pain hurts, that rejection paralyzes, that loneliness screams. But he also knew that even in this dark place, there are still decisions that can be made. And the most powerful of these is this: not surrender the key to your spirit to despair. How many times do we feel defeated and let it define everything? How many times do we allow a mistake, a no, a loss, to be read as a final sentence? Dickens knew what that was. He lived it. But I also knew how to see beyond. I knew how to find loopholes of light in places where there was only shadow. And he reminds us today that there is always a chance, however small, to rebuild something from the ashes. His word, addressed to the defeated, was not a scream. It was a whisper that crosses generations, a whisper that says, I was there too, but I didn't, and you can leave it too. He offered no empty promises, offered an example, offered true. It offered companionship in pain, and that is what heals the most. In the end, Dickens knew that the biggest risk was not to lose everything. It was to lose the faith that it is still possible to start over. And so, even without writing the sentence with all the letters, he left her impressed in every story. Desperation is useless, because hope can start out of nowhere. Charles Dickens was a man of letters, but it wasn't the school that taught him what mattered most. His deepest learnings did not come from notebooks or classrooms, came from pain. They came from the sidewalks where he walked alone, of the basements of the factories where he worked without childhood, of the doors that closed. the times when it had to swallow the cry so as not to be crushed by an indifferent world. It was there, in this place that society hides, that Dickens learned what no one teaches: how to survive when everything conspires against. He never had the luxury of learning out of curiosity, learned out of necessity. Each lesson it absorbed was torn from the skin's soul-tiredness, and that's why when he wrote his advice to the world, they did not come from theory, not coming of abstraction. They came from a real, dirty, difficult, but true place. His advice was wounded that healed badly, but still shone like a lighthouse. When you read Dickens, you feel something different. It is not just the beauty of language, it is the density of what is behind it. Each line carries a truth conquered with tears. Each paragraph is a fiction transvestite memory, and this is his greatest strength. He did not teach with superiority, he taught with empathy, because he knew what it was like to be lost. He knew what it was like to live without direction, without support, without reference. And that's why your stories act as compasses. They do not point to easy paths, but point to something much more necessary: the north of dignity, the resistance route, the firm ground of hope that is born inside, even when everything out seems to crumble. Dickens didn't need to say she understood the pain. She was there, printed on each character, in the orphans that begging affection, in workers crushed by the system, in solitary mothers in the forgotten old. They were not invented to fill pages. They were carved from the people he saw and the man he went. Life has taught Dickens that there is not always justice, but there is always choice, and that even the most fragile can be strong if it does not give the heart to cynicism. Your characters learn this, your readers learn this, and he himself lived that. So today, when you are lost, not knowing what to do or how to continue, remember Dickens, not as the consecrated author, but as the rejected boy, the young man ignored, the man who used his own struggle as a way and opened, with words, trails so that others could walk as well. No need to have a diploma to have wisdom. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from the deeper pain, and Charles Dickens, with all his humanity injured, was the silent teacher of millions, teaching, not wanting to teach, that life is hard, but the soul can be stronger. If you open any book by Charles Dickens carefully, you will notice a standard. No matter the plot, the scenario, time, or the characters, there is always someone on the verge of withdrawal: an invisible orphan, a forgotten woman, a man crushed by debt or loneliness, someone who is about to say, "I can't take it anymore." And it is exactly there, at this point where everything seems to have failed, that Dickens builds his most powerful message: resist. Your literature was not made for those who are comfortable. It was written as a map for the desperate, a guide for those who are on the edge, for those who cry without those who hear, for those who look around and see only closed doors. Dickens offered no illusions. He offered true. And the truth is that yes, the world can be cruel, unfair, and indifferent, but it is not the end. It is never the end. Your characters do not win easily. They catch, they fall, they are ignored, but they continue. And it is in this continuity, in this stubborn and silent step that it refuses to stop, that the lesson of Dickens lives. Not because everything will improve fast, but because giving up cannot be an option. Oliver Twist, hungry, suffers violence, is betrayed, but keeps a spark of purity lit. David Copperfield faces losses, humiliations, and injustices, but follows with dignity. Even the bitter Scrooge in A Christmas Tale only transforms because it faces its ghosts and chooses not to remain where it is. Dickens didn't just write to entertain. He wrote to remind those who were at the bottom of the well that there is also floor. That even on darker nights, there is still something that can be done, not stop. And perhaps this is the deepest secret of his work. It does not offer easy promises. She doesn't say everything will be resolved in a magic pass, but she says, with conviction, that resisting is worth it. Because when resisting, you rebuild yourself. And even if the world doesn't change, you change. And this is already a miracle. For those who are desperate, every Dickens book is a walk. A torch lit in the middle of the tunnel. A reminder that even when no one seems to see, you still exist, and it matters. And to move on, even among tears, it is an act of sacred strength. If you are in crisis today, embrace this lesson. Not as a commandment imposed, but as a hand extended by someone who was also on the ground, someone who turned the pain toward And it left, in writing, a possible way. Dickens didn't want to deceive you. I wanted to remind you that there is an output, but it starts with one step, not giving up. Charles Dickens never wanted to be seen as a motivator. He did not write with a lecture tone, nor did he promise happy endings for everyone. His words did not come from euphoria, they came from survival. Therefore, what it offers is not self-help. It is soul. It is a scar that became a compass. It's advice that doesn't try to cheer up, but wake up. Because there is a huge difference between comfort and waste tar. Console says it will pass. Awakening says don't stop. And Dickens always chose the second voice. He knew that some pains don't pass fast. I knew that some nights don't end up dawn. But I also knew that yet, under pain, tiredness and tears, it is still possible to move on. And that by itself is already a form of victory. Dickens's advice were not soft words for those who needed to sleep in peace. They were firm touches on the shoulder of those who were about to give up. He didn't want the reader to just feel something beautiful. He wanted him to feel something real. I wanted the reader to realize that there was someone on the other side of the page who understood what it is not to be understood, who knew how it hurts not to be seen, who knew the bitter taste of almost. Therefore, your advice has no ready sentences. They have stories, stories of those who bled and wrote anyway, stories of those who fell and used the floor as a starting point, stories that do not deny suffering but do not surrender to it either, because Dickens never wanted to take the pain from others. I just wanted to show that she doesn't have to have the last word. You may have tired of hearing empty promises, to be pushed by words that sound beautiful but do not touch their reality. And that's why Dickens is still necessary, because he doesn't try to make up his pain. He faces her, and boldly invites you to do the same. What he tells us still today is that, are you suffering? I have suffered. I am tired. I was too. But do not stop. Use this pain. Write with her. Work with her. Love with her. Because the world does not need perfect people. It needs real people, who does not surrender even when everything seems to crumble. It is not self-help. It is humanity. It is soul speaking with soul. And in the end, this may be the great victory. To continue even when no one sees, loving even with a broken heart, and follow even without knowing the way. Dickens did that. And so your words still do what no motivational formula can. Remember that life is worth it, even when it hurts. Most too in the middle, halfway, in the middle of pain, in the middle of tiredness. Most surrender before seeing the turn, before the miracle, before the answer. Because continuing requires something that not everyone is willing to offer. Perseverance, when there is no sign of reward. And that's exactly where Charles Dickens teaches us the greatest of all lessons, that the treasures of life are not in comfort, but in persistence. Dickens could have stopped in the factory abandonment in family trauma. It could have closed everything in the face of rejections, losses, intimate disappointment. But he didn't stop. Continued writing, he kept believing. He continued even when everything seemed useless, and that's why he saw what the weak never will see, the value of a victory built with pain. The beauty of his trajectory is not only in the success he came, but in the tortuous way he faced to get there. Fame, recognition, applause were consequences of a silent choice when no one looked, not giving up. When all the reasons to stop were there, he decided to continue, and that is what makes it eternal. Because those who continue see what is beyond pain, see what fear hides, see what haste never reaches. Only those who cross the dark valley can see the sun rise on the other side, and only those who resist are worthy of finding what was kept for those who do not stop. Dickens lived this and left this principle printed in each character. Oliver Twist, when moving on despite abuse. David Copperfield, when building his life even with everything against. Each of them teaches without saying, continue because the end is worth the pain of the way. Most too in the middle, but you don't have to stop. You can be one of those rare that even with your knees wounded, with your heart tired and your eyes without certainty, decides to take another step. Because what Dickens saw, what he has achieved, what he wrote, it was only possible because he didn't stop. And this is the invitation that he leaves us. Continue, even without applause. Continue, even without answers. Because what waits for you ahead is not visible now, but it's there. And only those who arrive see. The weak stops before, but the strong follow to the end. And there, well after it seemed impossible. This is where the miracle lives. Charles Dickens was acclaimed, admired, applauded. Wherever it was, it aroused respect and fascination. But behind the public brightness, there was a particular, silent, constant, invisible struggle in the eyes of those who exalted it. He smiled in public, yes, but inside, it was still the rejected boy, the abandoned young man, the man who carried more questions than answers. His real battle was not in the words said aloud, he was between the lines. There, hidden between commas and metaphors, he lived his most real struggle. "Your pen was yours," scream. It was the way he found not crazy with everything he felt and could not say. He wrote because he needed to survive emotionally, because each book was an intimate conversation with pain, an attempt to organize chaos, a way of saying, "I'm still here," without explaining everything. And in writing, Dickens gave us much more than stories. He gave us powerful advice, not with direct phrases, but with the intensity of what only those who have suffered can communicate. I didn't give up. And you don't have to. This is the heart of your work. Not the happy ending of the characters, not the drama of the plots, but the constant wire of the resistance. The silent statement that pain is not the end, that tiredness need not be surrender, that abandonment does not need to be destiny. With each book he left clues, small sparks of hope lit in the dark of the soul, because he knew there are defeats no one sees, and these are the ones that kill the most inside. Dickens fought these defeats every day. The struggle against guilt, against the sadness that returned without warning, against the feeling that it was not worthy, even though it was admired for thousands. But he never let himself be overcome. And that is why your books remain alive, because they are not just narratives, they are testimonies of resistance. Each time he put the tip of the feather on the paper, I was saying, "I'm still fighting." And each time a chapter ended, he left a certainty in the air. You can fight too. No matter how dark your night is, it doesn't matter if no one understands your pain. If you still breathe, you can still continue. He did not romanticize the pain. He faced her, and in doing so he taught that the secret is not in strong. He is not giving up when no one is seeing. It is persisting, even when everything inside you wants to stop. Dickens's true strength was not in his eloquent words. He was in his silent choice to move on. And this is the advice that he left to me, to you, to all who have already thought of giving up without anyone knowing. Continue, even in silence, even in fear, because his struggle, like his, can inspire the world. Even today it seems invisible. This video, this story, this journey, it's not just about literature. It's about you, about what you feel when the forces fail, about what you hide when the world expects you to be well, about the silence no one realizes, but that you carry inside. Charles Dickens did not just write to entertain, wrote to comfort, to be that invisible friend, what he does not judge, does not require, but understands. And today, right now, his advice comes to you. Continue, don't stop now. He knew what it is like to be on the edge. He knew what it is like to hear his mind by saying that he may make nothing sense. I knew what it's like to try and fail, love and be injured, believe and be frustrated. Therefore your words have weight, because they are not constructions of an isolated intellectual. These are confessions of someone who walked through dark valleys, but has not been lost in them. Today, if you are tired, you feel you have tried too much, if all inside you shouts to give up, know that Dickens has been there. And that's why he wrote, so that even without knowing your name, you feel seen. So that even without ever knowing you, he could extend his hand through history, so that your pain is not an end point, but a comma before a fresh start. Your books are not just well-written pages. They are refuges. They are silent hugs. These are invitations to take a deep breath and try again, because it is exactly right now when everything seems lost that the truest courage can be born. Not the courage to win, but to continue. And that's what Dickens tells you now. Not with easy promises, not with effects of effect, but with the wisdom of those who saw that the soul can resist, even broken, with the faith of those who have not let themselves be swallowed by defeat, with the love of those who wrote thinking about those who, like him, feel alone in the dark. Continue. This word does not require strength, it requires choice. Choose to take another step, even tremendous. Choose to believe that there is something on the other side, even if you don't see it yet. Choose not to end your story in a moment of pain. Maybe no one knows what you are facing. Maybe you can't even explain. But today, through these words, there is a bridge between you and the man who once thought of giving up and chose to continue. And if he could write after the pain, love after rejection, fight after the fall, you can. Don't stop now. The most beautiful part of your story may be a few steps from the place where you thought to stop. Now it's with you. It's no longer about Dickens, it's no longer about the characters, it is no longer about past stories. It's about your journey, your pain, your choice. Repeat with faith, even if the voice is weak, even if the tears come, even if everything inside you is tired, I will not give up. Say as if you get up, like who blues, but decided not to die inside, as one who saw the bottom of the well, but still believes in the light that may arise out of nowhere. Because that's what Dickens taught us. That the pain does not define the end. That the fall does not nullify the purpose. That the silent, invisible, lonely struggle is still valid. It is still worthy. It is still sacred. You are closer than you think. It may not seem. There may be no signs. But the truth is that the greatest miracles come after the last sigh of strength, after the last attempt, after the time when you almost stop. It is there, in the valley, where everything seems to die, that victory begins to be generated. Dickens left not just words, he left a reminder, a testimony, a legacy of someone who almost stopped but continued. And so your books still breathe, because they were written by a survivor. And now, this flame goes to you. You can also be one of those who resists. That transforms tear into purpose, silence in resistance, pain towards. Then declare with courage, from the bottom of your heart, I will not give up. It doesn't matter if you are in the middle of chaos, doubt, loss. This is just a chapter. It is not the end. The story is still being written, and what is to come can surprise even what you have already dreamed of one day, because whoever continues reaches what the weak never will see. Who resists sees the miracle. And today you chose to continue. Dickens won because he didn't stop. Even without applause, without guarantees, without promises, he just continued. And today, your story inspires us to do the same. The advice is simple, but it can save you from defeat. Don't stop now. If this video spoke to you, enjoy, subscribe, and activate the bell here. Each word has a destination. Raise those who think of giving up.